My name is Tom Sackville. I'm chairman of the Family Survival Trust, which is a charity that tries to look after families who've lost children into cults, into abusive cults. And Audrey, who I'm here with today, has spent her life counselling people who've been affected by cults. I haven't been affected personally, but when I was a Member of Parliament up in Bolton in Lancashire, people came to see me who'd got this problem, and I suddenly realised that where there's lots of help for people who got into drugs or whatever, ex-criminals, whatever, there's really no help for people who've got involved with cults, and their families who had felt that bereaved almost, that they'd lost them. Then, as it happens, I became for a short time a Home Office minister and found that in this country the establishment is pretty much decided not to do anything about this. Whether you're talking about police, social services, education, the Home Office, the Foreign Office, all the people who might be involved in doing something about cults are really not doing it, which is why I joined what was then FAIR, which has now become the Family Survival Trust, and we try and keep the flag flying for those families who have suffered and are still suffering as a result of cults. And there are plenty of cults around still, it's just their PR and their access to legal resources is much better, so you hear many less stories about them, that they're around and still doing a lot of damage to young people.
My name is Audrey Chater, and my two daughters in 1997 were recruited into the Church of Scientology. It was a while before I found out where they were, and I decided to go after them and get them back, which was a horrendous experience because I went into a place where I didn't have a friend at all, and everyone was against me. But I did succeed in bringing my youngest daughter out at that time. The elder one stayed in for 8 years, and she married a Scientologist and had 2 children. And I stayed with her all the way. I would visit her any time just to let her know that I was around, and I used to discuss things with her, whether she wanted to or not. And eventually I said, I think we've said everything we have to say, but I'm still here, and if you ever want to leave, you let me know. And I went away, and at that time I was living in Norway with my husband, and she rang me one day, and in a very small voice, which didn't sound like her at all because she doesn't have a small voice, she said, I'm ready to listen now. So what had happened, I don't know. But I went straight away from Norway into Denmark, and I brought her out with the 2 little girls, who at that time were 3 and 1.5. And she went away to live on the island of Bornholm because she wanted to stay in Denmark for the children, who were both Danish. And she started a business of her own, and she has survived. She bought a house, she's done everything, and I'm very proud of her. The girls are marvellous, and I'm one of the few successful parents who have recovered children from cults. There are very few of us, because brainwashing is such a powerful thing. And it's a scary thing. It brings fear with it. Somehow, once a person is controlled by someone else in this situation, it takes almost a miracle to get them out. So lots of young people are lost forever, and it's a world problem.
First joined the Church of Scientology, how did they change as people?
Well, I must correct you, you mustn't use the term joined.
No,
Nobody joins a cult. They are recruited by another person.
Okay.
So
Recruited.
they are recruited
Scientology.
by somebody deliberately looking for converts. My daughter was in Denmark and it was raining and she ran into a shop to get out of the rain, and it happened to be a Scientology bookshop. And she started to read the stuff. And then somebody came over and said, "Are you interested in this?" And she said, "Well, yeah." And that was it. That was how it happened to her. Because you see, their literature is very convincing. And they quote people who become Scientologists, film stars, and young people are looking for this. They're looking for famous people who've been converted, and they think, well, if they must be all right.
Yeah. So what did you notice about their behaviour when they?
Well, of course, they're all right until you start to question them and disagree with them, and then they become very abusive. We had a bad time after that. For the first time ever, I had a bad time with my children because they had been warned that I wouldn't like it, and so they were expecting trouble and they got it.
An interesting point to pick up. The cults, Scientology, they are trained in how to alienate new converts from their parents and friends, because they know these people around them are going to object and don't want them back. So they get them ready and have them calling their parents Satan and all sorts of terrible stuff, which you can imagine for any parent is about as painful as you can get beyond actually losing a child. And it is very organised and it's very nasty, and people don't quite realise how these cults actually conspire to get control of people and to get rid of their past life. And I think if more people around understood quite how bad it is, there would probably be more action taken to control cults. You may say, how do you control brainwashing? How do you criminalise it? Well, according to our authorities, there is no definition of mental kidnapping. In France, interesting enough, where they take this very seriously, they passed a law, called the Abu Bakr law, about 10 years ago, which actually made it a criminal offence to exploit a person in a state of psychological subjection. And they brought all sorts of cases against Scientology and other cults using that law. So it can be done. It's just it needs the will. It needs for more people to understand just how nasty these organisations are.
When you're learning, everything is a learning experience. When you're your age, everything. So they go for that. You see, but we can offer you this. We can offer you that. Just listen, read our literature, listen to us, and it's very hard to resist. Not for me, but for a young person, especially if they're away from home.
You went to rescue them. Did you do it single-handedly?
Yes.
How did you go about it?
I just walked in. I rang the bell and walked in.
Were they hostile to you then?
They weren't very pleased. But at the same time, they wanted to convince me that they were all right and that this was really a nice place. And all of these people were really nice. And of course, it went on so much, you begin to think, well, if they're so nice, you don't have to say it so often, because I see that they're nice. So it went on like that. Fortunately for me, I had an excellent relationship with my children, and never had any trouble. So they actually knew that if I was complaining so badly, that there must be something. I think that's what helped me.
I'm not really the practitioner as much as Audrey, but I would say that you've got to wait until they see sense. And Audrey's book, which we've got copies of, really sets out why you must keep in contact. You must not panic. You must not go away. You've got to be constantly there waiting for them to need you, but they will in the end. And not all, but some will. And if the families stay available and said, brainwashing is very, very powerful. It's as powerful that you can get people, in extreme situations to become suicide. Or now we're beginning to see all around the world people becoming suicide bombers because they've been brainwashed into doing that. I mean, that cannot happen to a person in the normal course of things. It can only happen if there's a real, very clever, very practiced technique used to turn them into somebody else. And when you hear about these cases in Britain, you often hear the parents or the friends saying, well, he or she must have been brainwashed. But the frustration for us is that the British government, advised by actually people who are still rivals of LSE, have for years really outlawed the term brainwashing and pretended it doesn't exist. It clearly exists. But how could anyone become an extreme cultist unless they've been interfered with mentally? Which is why you need a legal definition for it, which we don't have.
The British government, you see, has got Eileen Barker to defend whatever's happening on the cult scene, and she has told them that there is no such thing as brainwashing. It doesn't exist, she said. And she said that very recently. It doesn't exist. So please don't worry about it. It's just a whole heap of, over-anxious parents and all of this.
In the UK, active ones. Did you get or?
Well, it used to be. It has been assessed before. I'm trying to remember the number. That they reckon there was large and small, about 2,000. Because some of the small churches, especially the black churches, can be classed as cults. So that taking the whole picture, there's an awful lot.
But the problems of definition, I mean, some people assume that a cult is a great big organisation with offices in the Tottenham Court Road or whatever, but there's lots of groups where people are being abused and exploited and can't get out, and those are cults.
And they might be quite small.
They are, and so you'll have an awful lot is the answer, because people do abuse each other in this way and always have done. The question is, should the authorities be doing something about it? At least recognise it, that when you get spat out by a cult after some years and you're mentally damaged, at least the NHS should be trying to do something for you. But without guidance from the centre, which tends to be the Home Office, it's very difficult to get government helping anyone. So I'm afraid, first of all, you need a policy like the French or the Belgians or some of the German states have, that recognises that cults are harmful.
A cult is just a group of people with a common belief. It could be a gardening club. It could be. It could be a weekly drinking club. It could be anything. A cult is a group of people. So you have to be careful that what you're defining. Destructive groups. That's what we're talking about. Groups that destroy.
What's the most harmful?
I think the one that sticks in my mind is Waco. David Koresh, who had his people all together in a house, and he set fire to it and burned everybody in it. Children and everybody. That was horrific. It was on the television, it was coming out minute by minute. I couldn't believe that he would actually do it, but he had said he would. If the authorities tried to go in and free these people, he would kill them, and that's what he did. Now I think that was about 15 years ago.
I think it's more than that. But
20
it's
maybe?
one of them. It's one of those few extreme cases which makes the media. What you don't hear about is the less shocking cases where people are just taken away from their own habitat and used for years.
Yeah.
So really, it's those extreme cases which get cults the bad name, But there's an awful lot of cults which no one sees what they're up to, but they're doing a great deal of harm. What we need, though, is for someone in authority to actually recognise the whole concept of mental manipulation.
But you have to remember all the time that this destructive cult problem affects all people. It affects Islamists, Christians, every kind of person is vulnerable.
And the other thing is, people may think when they're first in a cult that it is benefiting them, but they soon, well, not soon, but eventually realise that they've been used. And of course the fact that they've been alienated from their family and friends is always bad. Now you're saying extreme case, someone who has no friends, that's not usually the target. Usually people lose friends and family when they go into a cult, and very often these cults are looking for people who've got well-off families because they're very interested in money.
Yeah.
The people that like found these cults, or they try to recruit people, why do you think they try to do it? Why would they want to take people away from their lives?
I think I'm right in saying that very often what we regard as abusive or destructive cults now originally were quite benign. They started, I don't say Scientology was ever very good, but there's a lot of the sort of religious type cults which were a congregation of people who ended up with a very charismatic leader. Maybe that leader or a successor realised they're in a position to exploit, and so then it became a destructive cult, having been perfectly okay to begin with. That's often the evolution. And whenever someone finds that they're in control of a bunch of people around them, they can go two ways. They can try and benefit those people, or they can try and exploit them sexually, exploit them financially, get free labour out of them, or get adulation from them, and it can go either way. So whenever you get a very controlling person, you have the possibility that could become destructive. But the only time it gets into the press really is when there's some outrage, or some star like Cruz makes a fool of himself on a sofa in Hollywood. And that then it becomes, or has marital problems, then it becomes an issue. Otherwise it disappears again. And unless the people who suffer from it really continually try and push their case, or unless we got, say, a Prime Minister or Home Secretary who had first-hand knowledge, we're unlikely to see much action. So as a charity, we try and raise some money in order to cover expenses, to try and get families together into meetings from time to time, just so that they know there are other people who have the same problem and they don't feel so alone. But the answer is we won't make any real progress until you get some official help for this, and that at the moment there's no recognition of it, even though in some other European countries they've seen the light and they are trying to help.
We might, one of these days, we might.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.